The false victory. The celebration of fools. The Epsilon sector blazed with artificial light as thousands of warships gathered in formation. The combined fleet of the Galactic Coalition floated in perfect symmetry, their hulls reflecting the brilliance of distant stars. Inside these vessels, soldiers from 50 different species embraced and cheered. Victory banners streamed across communication channels. Music from a dozen worlds played simultaneously, creating a chaotic symphony of triumph. Commander Xyloth stood on the command deck of the Eternal Dominion, flagship of the Kryn Empire. His forearms crossed over his chest in a gesture of satisfaction as he watched the celebration unfold. The viewing ports displayed a spectacle that would be remembered for generations. Ships fired harmless energy bursts into space, painting temporary patterns against the darkness. Some vessels performed synchronized maneuvers, their movements precise and elegant. The war was over. After 37 years of constant fighting, the Void Swarm had finally been defeated. The parasitic organism that consumed entire worlds, that turned living beings into mindless drones, that had killed trillions across the galaxy, was now nothing more than debris floating in the cosmic wind. Xyloth allowed himself a moment of pride. He had commanded the final assault personally, coordinating 7 battle groups in a simultaneous strike against the swarm's central hive cluster. His second officer approached with cautious optimism. The young Kryn female carried a data tablet displaying casualty reports and resource expenditures. The cost had been enormous. Over 2 million Coalition personnel had died in the final campaign. Hundreds of ships lay broken and unsalvageable. Entire planetary defense networks had been stripped bare to mount this last desperate offensive. But they had won. The price was terrible, but the alternative had been extinction. Commander Xyloth activated the fleet-wide communication system. His image appeared on every ship's display, his towering form and battle-scarred carapace a symbol of the Coalition's endurance. He spoke with the authority of someone who had earned respect through decades of service and sacrifice. His words were translated instantly into 50 languages, reaching every ear in the assembled armada. The speech was brief but powerful. He praised the courage of the fallen and the determination of the survivors. He spoke of unity and cooperation, of different species setting aside ancient rivalries to face a common threat. He declared this day a new beginning for galactic civilization, a fresh start built on the ashes of the old conflicts. The cheering that followed his words echoed through communication systems, a roar of relief and joy that seemed to shake the very fabric of space. The observer in Shadowfar from the celebrating fleet, hidden in the magnetic shadow of a pulsar, a different kind of vessel watched in silence. The ship was small, barely larger than a personal transport, its surface covered in adaptive plating that bent electromagnetic radiation around its hull. To any sensor system in the galaxy, it was invisible, a ghost, a whisper in the darkness. Captain Elena Vasquez sat in the cramped command chair of the stealth reconnaissance vessel Phantom Eye, her fingers moving across holographic displays with practiced efficiency. She had been stationed in this sector for 4 months, observing the Coalition's war against the Void Swarm. Her orders from Earth High Command were explicit and absolute. Observe, record, report, do not engage. Do not reveal humanity's existence under any circumstances. Elena was 38 years old, a career officer in the Terran Observation Corps. She had spent 15 years watching alien civilizations from the shadows, gathering intelligence about a galaxy that didn't know Earth existed. Humanity had discovered faster-than-light travel 52 years ago, but instead of announcing their presence to the cosmos, they had chosen a different path. They watched. They learned. They prepared. The decision had been controversial on Earth. Many argued for immediate contact with the Galactic Coalition. Others warned that revealing humanity's existence too soon could be catastrophic. The debate raged for years until a compromise was reached. Earth would build a hidden fleet, develop technologies in secret, and only reveal themselves when they were certain they could defend their homeworld against any threat. Until that day came, humanity would remain silent observers of galactic affairs. Elena had made peace with this policy long ago. She understood the reasoning behind it. The galaxy was dangerous. The Void Swarm proved that. But watching the celebration now, Seeing the relief and joy of species who had fought so hard for survival, she felt a strange sense of isolation. Humanity was part of this galaxy, whether the Coalition knew it or not. These people's struggles mattered to her. She ran another deep spectrum scan of the battlefield, following her standard observation protocol. The phantomized sensors were far more advanced than anything the Coalition possessed, capable of detecting energy signatures that other technologies missed entirely. Elena had watched the final battle closely, recording every tactical decision, every weapon deployment, every strategic maneuver. Earth's military analysts would study this data for years. Her scan swept across the debris field where the swarm's central hive cluster had been destroyed. Massive chunks of organic material floated in space, slowly dispersing. The Coalition's sensors had confirmed the destruction of all major swarm structures. Their biological warfare specialists had verified the death of the hive consciousness. Every measurement indicated complete victory. But Elena's sensors told a different story. The terrible truth. The anomaly appeared on her display as a faint thermal signature, buried deep within the debris field. At first, Elena thought it was residual heat from the battle, nothing more than cooling wreckage. But as she refined her scan, focusing the phantomized full sensor array on that specific location, she saw something that made her blood turn cold. The signature was growing stronger, not cooling down, but heating up. And it was moving with purpose, not drifting randomly like debris. Elena's hands flew across her controls, bringing up spectral analysis and biological scanners. The readings that appeared made her stomach clench with fear. It was void swarm tissue, but not dead matter. This was living, active, regenerating biomass. The energy patterns matched the swarm's neural network structures. As Elena watched in horror, her sensors detected the signature expanding, consuming nearby debris, growing larger with each passing minute. She immediately cross-referenced her findings with the Coalition's sensor data, trying to understand how they could have missed this. The answer became clear within seconds. The swarm tissue was hidden inside a dense pocket of ionized particles, a natural blind spot created by the intense energy weapons used in the final battle. The Coalition's sensors couldn't penetrate that interference. They had declared victory without verifying the complete destruction of their enemy. Elena ran a predictive analysis program, feeding in the growth rate and energy consumption patterns she was observing. The results appeared on her screen within moments, and they were catastrophic. At current regeneration speed, the swarm would rebuild its core consciousness within 72 hours. Within a week, it would be capable of producing new attack organisms. Within 2 weeks, it would launch a counter-offensive against the unprepared and celebrating Coalition fleet. But there was something worse. Elena's analysis detected subtle changes in the swarm's cellular structure. It was adapting, evolving in response to the weapons that had nearly destroyed it. The energy-based attacks that the Coalition relied on were being analyzed and countered at a genetic level. When the swarm returned, it would be immune to everything the Coalition could throw at it. Elena sat back in her chair, her mind racing through possibilities and protocols. She had discovered a threat that could destroy galactic civilization. The Coalition needed to know immediately, but contacting them would reveal the phantomized position and, by extension, humanity's existence. Her orders were clear: no contact under any circumstances. For several long minutes, Elena wrestled with the decision. She thought about the billions of lives that hung in the balance. She thought about her duty to Earth and the careful plans that had guided humanity's actions for 5 decades. She thought about the celebration happening just a few thousand kilometers away, all those people who believed they were finally safe. The decision crystallized in her mind with sudden clarity. Some orders were meant to be broken. The warning: no one believed Elena activated the phantomized communication system, configuring it to broadcast on Coalition military frequencies. She took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to do would change everything. Her voice would be the first human words ever heard by alien ears in this part of the galaxy. She spoke clearly and calmly, using galactic standard language that she had studied for years. Her message was direct and urgent. She identified herself as Captain Elena Vasquez of the Terran Observation Corps. She provided precise coordinates for the regenerating swarm tissue. She explained the threat in technical detail, including the adaptation patterns she had detected. She warned them that they had maybe 72 hours before the swarm would be strong enough to launch a surprise attack. The transmission ended. Elena waited for a response, her heart pounding in her chest. Seconds passed, then minutes. The celebration continued uninterrupted, as if nothing had happened. On the Eternal Dominion, Commander Xyloth's communication officer reported the strange transmission with confusion in his voice. The message had been received by every ship in the fleet, but nobody knew how to interpret it. The language was galactic standard, but the accent was unfamiliar. The species designation was completely unknown. Terran? There was no such species in any Coalition database. Xyloth ordered an immediate sensor sweep of the coordinates provided in the warning. His tactical officer complied, directing the Dominion's advanced scanning array toward the debris field. The results came back quickly. There was nothing there. No active swarm tissue, no regenerating biomass, just cooling wreckage and dispersing particles. The thermal signature Elena had detected was hidden too deeply within the ionized interference for Coalition sensors to penetrate. The commander made a quick decision based on the evidence before him. The transmission was either a hoax, a malfunctioning automated system, or perhaps a psychological warfare attempt by some rival faction within the Coalition. Whoever these Terrans claimed to be, their warning was clearly false. The sensors showed nothing dangerous. The biological warfare team had confirmed the swarm's complete destruction. There was no threat. Xyloth ordered his communication officer to dismiss the transmission and continue with the victory ceremonies. He made a mental note to investigate the source of the message later, after the celebration had concluded. Perhaps someone's communication system had been damaged in the battle and was broadcasting corrupted data. It wasn't worth worrying about now. Desperate measures, Elena watched in disbelief as the Coalition fleet completely ignored her warning. Ships continued their celebration. No additional scans were conducted. No alert status was declared. They thought she was wrong or lying or simply didn't exist. She sent a second transmission, this time with more urgency and detail. She attached sensor data from the Phantom Eye, hoping that hard evidence would convince them where words had failed. She explained exactly how the ionized particle field was hiding the swarm from their sensors. She provided step-by-step instructions for recalibrating their scanning arrays to detect the threat. This time, there was a response, a terse message from the Dominion's communication center, ordering the unknown vessel to identify itself properly and cease interfering with Coalition military frequencies. The tone was dismissive, almost annoyed. They didn't believe her. They thought she was a nuisance. Elena felt frustration and fear warring in her chest. She was watching a disaster unfold in slow motion, powerless to stop it. She could see the swarm regenerating on her sensors, growing stronger with each passing minute. She knew exactly what would happen when it reached critical mass. The celebrating fleet would be caught completely unprepared. Thousands of ships would be destroyed. Millions would die. She considered her options. The Phantom Eye was a reconnaissance vessel with no weapons. She couldn't attack the swarm herself. She could jump to Earth and request immediate military intervention. But that would take weeks, and by then it would be too late. She could try contacting individual ships in the Coalition fleet, hoping that someone would listen, but that seemed equally futile. As Elena debated her next move, her sensors detected a change in the swarm's behavior. The regenerating tissue had reached a critical threshold. It was no longer just healing itself. It was actively growing, producing new attack organisms at an accelerating rate. The timeline she had predicted was wrong. The swarm wouldn't take 72 hours to recover. It would take maybe 12 hours, perhaps less. Elena made her final attempt to warn the Coalition. She broadcast on every frequency simultaneously, overriding communication protocols with brute force signal strength. Her voice cut through music and celebration chatter, demanding attention. She screamed her warning into the void, begging them to listen, to scan the debris field properly, to prepare for what was coming. The response was swift and decisive. The Coalition's communication network identified her broadcasts as hostile jamming and blocked her frequencies. Security protocols activated across the fleet. Several warships broke formation and began moving toward her last known transmission point, intending to investigate and neutralize the source of interference. Elena realized she had accomplished nothing except drawing attention to herself. The Phantom Eye's stealth systems were excellent, but if Coalition warships started actively searching this sector, they might detect her. She made the painful decision to withdraw. She programmed a jump sequence that would take her to the nearest Earth monitoring station, several light years away. Before she left, Elena recorded one final message. She documented everything she had observed, every sensor reading, every ignored warning. She addressed the message to whoever would find it in the future, a testament to the disaster she had tried to prevent. Then she activated the Phantomized quantum drive and vanished into faster-than-light travel, leaving the celebrating coalition fleet alone with the enemy they thought was dead. The attack begins 14 hours later. In the middle of the night cycle for most species aboard the coalition vessels, the Void Swarm struck. The attack was sudden, vicious, and perfectly timed. The regenerated swarm core had produced thousands of attack organisms while the fleet slept, building its forces in absolute silence. The first warning came from a patrol ship on the outer perimeter of the fleet formation. Its sensors detected movement in the debris field just seconds before organic projectiles tore through its hull. The ship's distress call was cut short as swarm tendrils pierced its reactor core, causing a cascade failure that consumed the vessel in brilliant fire. Within minutes, the entire coalition fleet was under assault. Swarm organisms emerged from hiding places throughout the debris field, attacking from multiple directions simultaneously. These were not the creatures the coalition had fought before. These were evolved versions, their biology adapted to resist the energy weapons that had nearly destroyed their hive. Coalition plasma cannons fired desperately into the swarm, but the effects were minimal. The creature's organic armor now absorbed and dispersed energy attacks with frightening efficiency. Particle beams that should have cut through swarm tissue simply washed over the attacking organisms like water off stone. Fusion missiles detonated harmlessly against bioshields that shouldn't have been possible. Commander Xyloth stood on the Dominion's bridge in shock, watching his fleet being torn apart. Ships died by the dozens, their hulls breached, their crews consumed. The formations that looked so beautiful during celebration now became death traps as vessels collided in panic. Communication channels filled with screams and desperate pleas for help. He tried to organize a defensive response, but the swarm's attack was too coordinated, too overwhelming. Every tactical decision he made seemed to fail. Every defensive position collapsed within minutes. The creatures anticipated every move, countered every strategy. It was as if they had studied the coalition's tactics and prepared specifically to defeat them. In the desperate chaos of battle, Xyloth remembered the warning from the unknown Terran vessel. The precise coordinates, the urgent tone, the detailed technical information about swarm regeneration and adaptation. Everything that mysterious voice had predicted was now happening exactly as described. Xyloth realized with crushing guilt that he had made a catastrophic mistake. Someone had tried to save them and he had dismissed the warning as irrelevant noise. Now thousands of his people were dying because of his arrogance and assumptions. The Dominion shuddered as swarm organisms attached to its hull, their acid secretions eating through armor plating. Xyloth gave the order that no commander ever wanted to give. He ordered the surviving ships to retreat, to abandon the Epsilon sector entirely. The celebration had turned into a massacre, and survival was now the only priority. As coalition vessels jumped to faster-than-light speed, fleeing in every direction, Xyloth sent one final transmission into the void. It was addressed to the mysterious Terran who had tried to warn them. The message was simple and filled with regret. He acknowledged his mistake. He apologized for not listening. And he begged for help, because the Galactic Coalition could no longer defeat the Void Swarm alone. The transmission traveled through space at light speed, spreading across multiple star systems. Eventually it would reach Earth. The question was whether humanity would answer the call, and if they did, whether they would arrive in time to matter. Iron and determination, Earth decides. The message from Commander Xyloth reached Earth's Deep Space Monitoring Station 12, exactly 47 hours after the Epsilon Sector massacre. Lieutenant Sarah Chen was on duty when the transmission arrived, its alien encryption patterns triggering every alert system in the facility. She immediately forwarded it to Geneva headquarters, flagging it as Priority 1 contact. Within 3 hours, the entire Unified Earth Command sat in emergency session deep beneath the Swiss mountains. President Marcus Webb reviewed the translated message for the third time, his weathered face showing the weight of impossible decisions. Around the conference table sat representatives from every major nation and the commanders of Earth's secret military forces. The room fell silent as Admiral Richard Zhang activated a holographic display showing the aftermath of the Epsilon Sector battle. Earth's reconnaissance network had captured detailed imagery of the disaster. Over 3,000 coalition ships destroyed, estimated casualties exceeding 4 million personnel. The Void Swarm now controlled a strategic sector and was rapidly expanding its territory, consuming resources and building more attack organisms. General Amanda Foster, commander of Earth's ground forces, spoke first. Her voice carried the firmness of someone who had spent 30 years preparing for scenarios exactly like this. She argued that humanity's isolation policy had served its purpose. They had built a powerful fleet in secret. They had developed technologies that the galaxy didn't possess. They had prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. Now the worst had arrived, and sitting idle would serve no one. The opposition came from Ambassador Liu Wei, Earth's senior diplomatic strategist. He warned about revealing humanity's existence during a crisis. First contact should happen on humanity's terms, not as a desperate response to alien warfare. Once Earth showed itself to the galaxy, there would be no taking it back. They would become players in cosmic politics whether they wanted to or not. President Webb listened to both sides before asking the question that truly mattered. He wanted to know if Earth's fleet could make a difference. Not whether they should intervene, but whether intervention would actually help or simply add human casualties to the growing death toll. Admiral Zhang answered with carefully measured confidence. Earth's dreadnought fleet had been designed specifically for fighting an enemy like the Void Swarm. While the coalition relied on energy-based weapons and advanced shielding, Earth had taken a different approach. Human military doctrine emphasized kinetic weapons, electromagnetic warfare, and aggressive close-range tactics. These methods were considered primitive by galactic standards, but they had one critical advantage. The Void Swarm had never encountered them and therefore couldn't have adapted to counter them. The Admiral brought up tactical simulations that Earth's military computers had been running since the Epsilon Sector battle. The models predicted that human weapons would be highly effective against swarm organisms, at least initially. Tungsten penetrator rounds traveling at relativistic speeds would punch through organic armor that deflected energy beams. Electromagnetic pulse weapons would disrupt the swarm's bioelectric neural networks. Nuclear weapons would create physical shock waves that the creatures couldn't absorb or disperse. Of course, simulations were just educated guesses. Real combat would reveal whether human technology truly had an advantage. But the projections were promising enough to suggest that Earth's intervention could genuinely turn the tide of the war. The debate continued for 6 more hours, with arguments becoming increasingly heated as the night wore on. Finally, President Webb called for a vote. The decision required unanimous approval from all 7 continental representatives and majority approval from the military command. The voting process took 20 minutes. When the results appeared on the main display, the room fell silent. The vote was decisive. Earth would reveal itself to the galaxy and commit its forces to stopping the Void Swarm. Humanity's era of hiding in the shadows was over. President Webb issued immediate orders. Admiral Zhang was given full authority to deploy the Dreadnought fleet and engage the enemy as he saw fit. Captain Elena Vasquez, who had sent the original warnings from the Phantom Eye, was recalled to Earth and promoted to Commodore for her actions. She would serve as Zhang's second-in-command and primary liaison with coalition forces. The orders went out through Earth's military network with maximum priority. In orbital shipyards around Mars, Jupiter's moons, and hidden bases throughout the asteroid belt, crews began final preparations for deployment. Ships that had waited in silence for decades now powered up their systems and prepared for war. The fleet that humanity built, the Terran Dreadnought fleet, was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. 300 massive warships, each one a monument to human engineering and determination. They had been built over 50 years by a species that understood the cost of being unprepared for threats. Admiral Zhang stood on the bridge of his flagship, the TDS Indomitable, and watched through observation ports as the fleet assembled in formation around Mars' orbit. Each ship represented billions of credits of resources, millions of hours of labor, and the combined knowledge of humanity's finest scientific minds. The dreadnoughts were enormous, each measuring over 2 kilometers in length. Their hulls were angular and brutal, covered in composite armor that prioritized protection over aesthetics. They looked like weapons forged by a species that took warfare seriously. No elegant curves or decorative elements, just raw functional power designed to survive and destroy. Each vessel carried a crew of 800 personnel, carefully selected from Earth's military forces, and trained in combat doctrines that emphasized aggression and adaptability. The human approach to space warfare was fundamentally different from the Coalition's methodology. Where alien forces fought in elegant formations with energy weapons at long range, humans preferred close-quarters combat with kinetic weapons and overwhelming firepower. The ship's armaments reflected this philosophy. Primary weapons were heavy mass drivers capable of accelerating tungsten projectiles to half the speed of light. Each round carried more kinetic energy than a nuclear warhead, and the guns could fire in sustained volleys that would overwhelm any defense. Secondary weapons included railguns, missile batteries loaded with fusion warheads, and electromagnetic pulse cannons designed to disable organic and electronic systems simultaneously. But the fleet's most revolutionary technology was its quantum displacement drive. Unlike the Coalition's faster-than-light engines that required careful calculations and several minutes to activate, the quantum drive allowed for tactical jumps during combat. A dreadnought could appear inside an enemy formation, unleash devastating firepower, and vanish before retaliation arrived. This made human ships unpredictable and terrifying in battle. Admiral Zhang walked slowly through the Indomitable's bridge, observing his crew as they performed final system checks. These men and women had trained their entire lives for a war they hoped would never come. Now that moment had arrived, and he could see the mixture of fear and determination on their faces. His executive officer, Commander James Park, approached with a status report. All 300 ships were ready for deployment. Crews were at battle stations. Weapon systems showed green across the board. The quantum displacement drives were calibrated and ready for the tactical jump to the Epsilon sector. Zhang nodded slowly. He activated the fleet-wide communication system, and his image appeared on every ship's main display. 300 bridge crews stopped their preparations to listen as their commander spoke. His speech was not flowery or dramatic. Zhang spoke plainly, with the directness that military personnel appreciated. He explained the situation. The Galactic Coalition was losing a war against an enemy that had adapted to their weapons. Millions had already died. Billions more would die if the Void Swarm wasn't stopped. Earth had the tools and the training to make a difference. Now they had the opportunity to prove that humanity belonged in the wider galaxy. Zhang acknowledged the risks. They would be fighting an enemy they had never faced in direct combat. They would be operating in a hostile environment, far from Earth's support networks. Casualties were inevitable. Some ships would not return home. But the alternative was to hide while civilizations burned, and that was not acceptable to anyone wearing Earth's uniform. He concluded with words that would become famous in human history. He told his fleet that they were not going to the Epsilon sector as conquerors or saviors. They were going as equals who refused to stand aside while others fought humanity's fight. The Void Swarm threatened all intelligent life in the galaxy. That made it Earth's enemy, and Earth did not abandon its responsibilities. The communication ended. Zhang took his command chair and gave the order that would change human history forever. He ordered the fleet to jump. 300 quantum drives activated simultaneously, tearing holes in the fabric of space-time. The massive dreadnoughts vanished from Mars' orbit in a brilliant cascade of displaced energy. They would emerge in the Epsilon sector in exactly 17 minutes. The Coalition forces fighting desperately to hold their positions would suddenly discover they were no longer alone. Contact the Coalition defense line at Epsilon sector was collapsing when the Terran fleet arrived. Commander Xyloth stood on what remained of the Dominion's bridge, watching helplessly as another wave of swarm organisms crashed against his forces. His fleet had been reduced to fewer than 800 ships, and those survivors were damaged and running low on ammunition. The defensive perimeter had contracted to a fraction of its original size. It was only a matter of hours before complete defeat. Then space itself seemed to explode. 300 tiers in reality opened simultaneously throughout the battlefield, flooding sensor displays with massive energy signatures. Xyloth's tactical officer shouted in confusion as unknown vessels emerged from those quantum rifts. The ships were enormous, larger than anything in the Coalition fleet, and they radiated power signatures that made no sense according to established physics. For a moment, everyone on the Dominion's bridge simply stared. These vessels were clearly warships, but their design was completely foreign. Angular armor plating covered every surface. Weapons bristled from multiple hardpoints. They moved with purpose and coordination, immediately establishing attack formations that suggested extensive tactical training. Then the unknown fleet opened fire, and Xyloth understood that everything had changed. The sound of mass drivers discharging doesn't travel in space, but Xyloth could see the results. Tungsten penetrator rounds, each weighing several tons and traveling at unimaginable speeds, slammed into swarm organisms with devastating effect. The creatures' adapted armor, which shrugged off energy weapons so easily, simply exploded when hit by kinetic projectiles moving at relativistic velocities. One of the unknown ships fired what appeared to be primitive missiles. Xyloth's tactical systems identified them as fusion warheads, ancient technology that most civilized species had abandoned thousands of years ago. But when those warheads detonated among a cluster of swarm vessels, the physical shockwave tore through organic tissue like paper. Dozens of creatures that had seemed invincible moments before were simply obliterated. Another unknown vessel deployed electromagnetic pulse weapons. Brilliant arcs of energy washed over swarm organisms, and Xyloth watched in amazement as the creatures suddenly stopped moving. Their bioelectric neural networks, which controlled all movement and coordination, had been completely disrupted. The paralyzed organisms drifted helplessly in space, easy targets for follow-up attacks. The unknown fleet fought with a ferocity that Xyloth had never witnessed. They didn't maintain safe distances or careful formations. They jumped directly into the swarm attack waves using some kind of tactical displacement technology. They fought at point-blank range, their weapons firing continuous volleys that turned space into a storm of destruction. And they coordinated their attacks with precision that suggested extensive combat experience despite their primitive appearance. Xyloth's communication officer suddenly announced an incoming transmission on Coalition military frequencies. The message was in perfect galactic standard, though the accent was unfamiliar. Xyloth ordered it displayed on the main screen, and found himself looking at an alien face he didn't recognize. The being was humanoid, with bilateral symmetry and forward-facing eyes that suggested predator evolution. The face was relatively smooth compared to most species, with minimal facial features beyond eyes, nose, and mouth. The being wore a military uniform that was functional rather than decorative, with rank insignia that suggested high command authority. The alien spoke with calm confidence, introducing himself as Admiral Richard Zhang of the Terran Defense Fleet. He stated that human forces were deploying to assist Coalition defensive operations. He requested that Coalition ships maintain their current positions and focus on defending against any swarm organisms that broke through the human attack formations. His tone suggested cooperation rather than command, respecting Coalition authority while making clear that human forces would take the offensive lead. Xyloth found his voice after a moment of stunned silence. He identified himself and thanked the Admiral for the assistance. He tried to ask questions about where these Terrans came from and why they had arrived now, but Zhang politely deferred those conversations to later. Right now, there was a battle to win. The communication ended, and Xyloth watched as the human fleet continued its devastating assault on the Void Swarm. His tactical officer provided continuous updates as swarm vessels died by the dozens. The creatures tried to adapt, tried to evolve counters to these new weapons, but the process took time, and time was something they no longer had. The battle lasted 8 hours. By the end, the swarm's offensive had been completely broken. Not defeated entirely, but driven back with casualties that would take months to replace. The immediate threat to the Epsilon sector was eliminated, and the Coalition's defensive line had held thanks to human intervention. As the last swarm organisms retreated into deep space, Xyloth sat in his command chair and tried to process what had just happened. An unknown species had appeared from nowhere with military technology that shouldn't exist, and fighting tactics that defied conventional wisdom. They had saved his fleet from certain destruction, and now they would have questions. Lots of questions. Admiral Zhang's face appeared on Xyloth's screen again, this time with a more relaxed expression. He stated that his fleet would maintain position in the Epsilon sector and assist with rescue operations for damaged Coalition vessels. He offered medical supplies, repair equipment, and humanitarian aid. Then he added that it was probably time for Earth and the Galactic Coalition to have a formal conversation about the future. Xyloth agreed immediately. He had so many questions he didn't know where to start. But one question dominated his thoughts above all others. He asked Admiral Zhang directly and without pretense. He wanted to know where humanity had been hiding and why they had chosen now to reveal themselves. Zhang's response was simple and honest. He explained that Earth had discovered faster-than-light travel 52 years ago and immediately began observing galactic civilization. They saw species fighting wars, forming alliances, dealing with threats. Humanity made a decision to remain hidden until they were certain they could defend themselves and contribute meaningfully to galactic society. They built their fleet in secret, developed their technologies without interference, and waited for the right moment. The war against the Void Swarm convinced them that moment had arrived. Xyloth absorbed this information slowly. 52 years of observation, decades of preparation, an entire species building a military fleet, while the rest of the galaxy remained oblivious. It was unprecedented. It was slightly disturbing. But given the current circumstances, it was also extremely fortunate. He asked Zhang what humanity wanted in return for their help. The question was direct and necessary. In galactic politics, nothing came without cost. Alliances had prices. Military aid created obligations. Zhang smiled slightly, and his answer surprised Xyloth more than anything else that day. He stated that humanity wanted nothing except recognition and respect. They didn't want territory or resources. They didn't want political power or special privileges. They simply wanted to be acknowledged as equal partners in the galactic community, with a voice in decisions that affected all civilizations. They wanted to help defeat the Void Swarm because allowing it to spread threatened Earth as much as it threatened everyone else. Xyloth found himself believing the Admiral. There was something in Zhang's tone, something in his direct manner of speaking that suggested honesty. Humanity could have remained hidden and let the galaxy burn. Instead, they revealed themselves and risked their people to help strangers. That suggested a moral character that deserved respect. He told Zhang that he would personally recommend immediate coalition membership for Earth and full partnership status in the war effort. After what human forces had just demonstrated, only fools would argue against inclusion, and the coalition had learned painful lessons about ignoring warnings from Terrans. The two commanders agreed to meet in person within the next few days to discuss strategy and coordination. For now, both fleets needed to recover from battle, repair damaged systems, and care for wounded personnel. But the future looked different than it had just hours ago. The galaxy now knew that humanity existed, and the Void Swarm was about to learn that it faced an enemy unlike any it had encountered before. The message home. Admiral Zhang stood alone in his quarters aboard the Indomitable, composing his report to Earth Command. The battle was over. Human forces had performed exactly as predicted, proving that their weapons and tactics were effective against the Void Swarm. Casualties had been minimal, only 3 ships severely damaged and 47 personnel killed in action. Compared to the Coalition's losses, it was miraculously light, but Zhang knew this was only the beginning. The Void Swarm had breeding worlds hidden somewhere in deep space. It would adapt to human weapons eventually, just as it had adapted to Coalition technology. The war would be long and costly. Earth had committed itself to fighting alongside alien species in a conflict that could last years or even decades. He recorded his observations about the Coalition forces. They were brave and determined, but their tactical doctrines were inadequate for fighting an adaptive enemy. They relied too heavily on technology and not enough on flexibility. They needed training in human-style warfare, and Earth needed to learn from Coalition experience. Partnership would benefit both sides. Zhang also noted his conversation with Commander Xyloth. The Kryn officer seemed honorable and pragmatic. Building a working relationship with him would be crucial for integrating human and Coalition forces. The Admiral recommended that Earth begin preparing diplomatic teams for immediate deployment to Coalition territory. First contact had happened in battle, but now came the harder work of building lasting alliances. The report concluded with Zhang's personal assessment. He stated his belief that revealing humanity's existence was the right decision. Earth could no longer afford to hide while the galaxy burned. Whatever challenges came from joining galactic civilization would be preferable to the alternative. Isolation might seem safe, but it was ultimately an illusion. The Void Swarm proved that threats didn't respect boundaries or recognize neutrality. Zhang transmitted the report and then allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought about Earth, that small blue world orbiting an average yellow star. For so long, humanity had wondered if they were alone in the universe. Now they knew they weren't, and they had chosen to stand with their neighbors against a common enemy. He wondered what historians would say about this day, centuries in the future. Would they praise the decision to reveal humanity's existence, or would they criticize the risks taken? Zhang didn't know and ultimately didn't care. He had made the choice he believed was right, and he would live with the consequences. Outside his viewport, human dreadnoughts maintained formation alongside coalition warships. Two fleets that hadn't known each other existed a day ago, now allies in the most important war the galaxy had ever fought. Zhang watched that sight for a long moment, then returned to his duties. There was work to do, and the fight was far from over. The galaxy had celebrated too soon once before. Humanity would make sure